Great. Okay, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Gabby Villasenor, and I'm the North Clackamas Community Coordinator for Growing Gardens. And today we have with us Adrienne and Ryan from Happy Trashcan Curbside Composting. So I want to say hello and thanks so much for taking time out of your weekend, spending time on a Saturday to talk about composting and why it's so important. I'm going to read a little bit about Adrienne and Ryan. So Happy Trashcan Curbside Composting is a residential and commercial composting business run by husband and wife duo Adrienne Huckabone and Ryan Green in Livingston, Montana. Their focus is to support local soil health and close the local food system while creating the highest quality compost available for their subscribers. Their compost is made from local food waste and goes directly back to gardens and farms in Gallatin Valley and Park County, Montana. They currently process over 20,000 pounds of food waste each week, which that number may have gone up since I've found this number online, and within 8 weeks are able to turn it into nutrient-rich compost that goes right back into communities and farms, creating healthy soils for all. Adrienne and Ryan have varied backgrounds stemming from the arts, agriculture, and high-density composting practices. And we are so lucky to be chatting with them today and to be able to learn a little bit more about what they do. And we also, just to be able to help our gardeners in the Home Gardens program to learn a little bit more about how they can compost in their backyard and what that means for the environment as a whole. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
So I go ahead and hand it over to you, and I'll stop sharing my screen. And it's really casual. If you want to share slides or if you just want to talk about practices, feel free to take it away from here.
Great. Thanks, Gabby, for having us. And thank you, Growing Gardens PDX. Congratulations on 25 years of service to the community. Really inspiring work that you folks are doing out there. And so we're excited to talk to you and your gardeners a little bit about composting. So basically, composting is nature's way of recycling organic waste, organic meaning carbon-based material.
Natural materials.
Natural materials. It's a very, nature does this on its own in our forest floors, out in the wild. Material slowly breaks down with the help of micro and macro organisms, and then replenishes the top few inches of topsoil to create a self-sustaining ecosystem. We as humans in the early 20th century, late 19th century, decided that a better option would be to store and put our refuse, our garbage, into landfill situations, even dumping it into the ocean, depending on where your location was. And this all came about due to public health issues and concerns of people collecting their waste in their yards, and basically it becoming a place for diseases and bacteria to grow. And so out of that, it was, municipalities and communities started collecting and putting into a landfill, thinking that that was the better option. But long term, not realizing the negative effects that putting this organic material into a closed environment. So composting is an aerobic decomposition, aerobic meaning with oxygen. And when we put this organic material into the landfills, it is anaerobic decomposition, meaning without oxygen. And what happens there when we're dealing with anaerobic decomposition, it's a whole nother set of microbes. And these microbes are just literally microscopic organisms that are just floating around us in the air and the soil. They are there naturally living amongst us, and they are what are truly responsible for the breakdown of this material. So when we put it into a landfill, it's anaerobic. It's a whole different set of microbes versus composting and aerobic decomposition. But a major byproduct of anaerobic decomposition is methane gas. And methane gas is upwards of 70 times worse than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. And when we're talking greenhouse gases, we're obviously talking about climate change and depletion of ozone. And so really, when we're talking about this existential crisis of climate change that's currently facing our society and civilizations and our species, the planet, really, composting is really low-hanging fruit for individuals and communities to address this very large issue of climate change.
Methane, there's a few sources where methane comes from, but the landfill is, I think I saw just about 20%. Landfills create about 20% of total methane in the atmosphere. And so, you know, we can't do too much immediately about the, the methane coming from large cattle farms, but we can really do a lot really quickly with the methane coming from the landfills. So that's a big, easy step to start day one.
So in addition to trying to curb this production of methane from our landfills, another thing is capturing the nutrients that are stored in this food waste. It's not waste, it's a resource, really. But capturing those nutrients, and then also capturing that organic matter as well, which is very important for building and maintaining healthy soils. So, that's kind of the basics of why we want to compost, what we're trying to accomplish as a business, but also as individuals when we're doing this in our backyard or in our community gardens. And so there's—
And it's really fun.
It's very, it's a very, I really like to say that it is, it's a truly transformative process in which you're seeing this waste material, or what our society labels as a waste material, transform naturally over time with little, with minimal input from us and energy into the process, that nature is just doing this on its own, that these microbes, what we're doing basically is we're creating a feedstock and a home, if you will, for these microbes to colonize, break the material down, and then
do their thing.
And
making a microbe home.
We're making a home for microbes. And so
and they keep living too.
and then taking that finished compost, which also, has the nutrients that we spoke about, has the organic matter, which is important for building healthy soils, and then also is chock full of living organisms that we're then injecting back into the soil. Because yes, the soil, our soil is not, it's not just a growing medium, but it's its own ecosystem that is sustaining itself and the plants that we're trying to grow in it. And so every time we're growing vegetables and we're pulling those vegetables out, we're pulling nutrients out, we're pulling organic matter out, we're pulling microbes out as well too. So it's important to replenish this cycle. So yeah, so we're doing this.
So that's the what
That's the what. That's what.
and the why.
And the why of composting.
Should we talk about the how?
The how. Now on to the how. So so the hows of composting is, what we're doing, as I mentioned, is we're creating this feedstock and home for the microbes. Well, we're taking our food waste, which is high nitrogen content, and then we're mixing it with our brown waste, our carbaceous material, heavy carbon-based material, mixing those together to create a feedstock that is going to allow those microbes to break everything down. So we're taking our green waste, high in nitrogen, brown waste, leaves, wood chips, sawdust, etc., mixing it together, building out. We build out big windrows, but in a backyard garden, you would build a small pile or something along those lines.
We can share the pictures.
We can share the pictures.
Share screen. Oh, here we go. Nice.
Can you see this?
Yes.
It's big.
How do I do that?
Just click on it.
So,
Can you see the picture, or is it the folder?
Oh, we see the folder.
okay, how do I stop sharing?
I don't think we can do it.
Yeah, this will work.
It works.
Click on one of the.
Make it larger, maybe.
Can you see this?
There we go.
So yeah, so we're creating this home and environment and feedstock for these microbes to break down this material, and naturally they'll just do this over time. You can throw a bunch of food waste, throw some leaves over it, and eventually you can not touch it. Eventually it's going to break down into what we call compost. But what we're trying to achieve here when we are actively managing the composting process is we're managing certain variables that will expedite the process. Primarily those being oxygen levels, moisture, and those are your two big ones that a home composter is going to focus on. And then we have some other ones as larger scale composters. But anyways, moisture, oxygen, and temperature are the three things that we're managing here. So first of all, let's talk about moisture. What do all living things need to exist? Water. We all need water to survive. All living organisms need water to survive. So we need to make sure that there's enough moisture in our piles to sustain those microbes to do their part in the breakdown of material. And food waste has a lot of moisture in it already. Food waste, 60% of food waste is water. But over time, what happens in the composting process is that it is a thermophilic reaction. So as these microbes are breaking down this material, they're releasing heat. In your compost pile, our compost windrows, for instance, cook in their active phase at a consistent 150 degrees. A good compost pile, and there's two different, there's hot composting, which we do, which is composting over 130 degrees. And then there's cold composting, which is under 130 degrees, but that takes much longer. So and there's a lot of benefits to the hot composting as well, too. So when we're up over 132 degrees, those microbes are doing their thing. They're breaking down the pile, but what's happening is you're losing a lot of moisture due to evaporation. So we want to make sure to go in there consistently, check moisture levels, and it can be as simple as going into the pile, getting a handful, and if you can wring out that pile, and it's like a little sponge, you want your compost pile to kind of be like a semi-wet sponge where you can squeeze it and you're gonna get a little moisture coming out of it. And so there's our moisture. We're actively managing that. We're adding water to the process throughout the process. The next one would be oxygen. So again, another thing, we all need oxygen to survive. So do these microbes. The whole point of what we're doing is managing an oxygenated environment for these microbes to thrive. And we do that by different forms of aeration. Mainly what you'll see, and that's a good one to bring up,
Adrienne.
Okay, so mainly
You guys can see that 3-bin system now, right?
Yep, looks great.
So what's happening here is, as we're mixing this material of the nitrogen food waste, nitrogen heavy material food waste, and the carbaceous heavy material, leaves primarily in a home garden situation. As the material is cooking and breaking down, it's going to reduce in mass as well too. In hot composting, there's less mass reduction, but essentially what's going to happen is the material is going to start to break down on itself and collapse in on itself, and thus closing air pathways for oxygen to come in. So we come in and give it a good turn once a week, base once a week. You can't see me? Oh, it's fine.
Okay.
So you want to get in there and turn that material. So that's bringing oxygen into the pile. And then the third, what I mentioned, variable that we're kind of really maintaining is temperature. And what that temperature is going to tell us is how active our pile is. So if we're up around 132 degrees, that's going to show us that we're having a very active decomposition rate, that those microbes are in there really breaking down the material very quickly. And also to mention too, there's different temperature ranges that different populations of microbes exist in. And those microbes are going to be more efficient at breaking down certain material in certain compounds versus others. So when we're monitoring temperature, we got a big probe in there. For over 130 degrees, you're doing a great job. You've got active decomposition, but also another important aspect of that is we're killing off any potential weed seeds that might be in there. So if you're in a home garden and you're not only composting your food waste, but you're also composting your yard waste as well, unwanted weeds, you're going to sterilize any weed seeds that potentially might be there. And then when you're spreading the finished compost, you're not spreading weeds. But also, and for us as commercial composters, this is what's most important, because we accept meat and dairy, which is something that you typically don't compost in your home backyard, is that we're killing off any potential pathogens as well. So E. coli or salmonella, which would be associated with accepting and composting meat and dairy byproducts. So these are the 3 basic variables that we're managing in the composting process: is water, oxygen, and temperature. As a home composter, those are the 3 things that you're really gonna want to focus on. And even us as a commercial composter, those are the 3 things that we focus on most of all.
Should we talk about the bins?
Yeah,
and how
why don't you
that's
take
working?
that over?
Well, we were just sharing this picture, but we'll come back to it again. This is an image of a 3-bin system, which is Ryan's recommended method. A lot of people have the kind of tumbler composters and have a hard time maintaining those, but the 3-bin system is great. They're easy to to build. They're easy to maintain. We built one a long time ago in New York City. That's a picture of us doing that. And so you go from left to right, and you just move through the compost, and it makes it really easy to have an active bin, a mid-active bin, and then a finishing bin. So that's helpful for people doing it at home.
Yeah, certainly. And it's important, as Adrienne mentioned, those three. You're thinking that when we're doing composting too, we need to think about the different phases that we're working through as well. So
yeah,
active is your phase one is always your most active phase, where you're going to get your highest temperatures and where really the majority of your physical decomposition is happening, where those banana peels are getting broken down into unrecognizable parts.
mm-hmm.
And then you have a second phase, which is typically a little bit lower temperatures, where things are physically broken down and unrecognizable, but those microbes are breaking down more complex compounds into base states that are going to be able to be absorbed by plants. And then the third phase is what we would call a curing process, where everything's physically broken down. Most of your complex compounds are completely broken down. And then things are just starting to stabilize. Heat, temperature in your piles are reducing down. And again, as the temperature is dropping, the active microbe population that is doing a certain type of decomposition is going dormant, and then a new one is coming in and kind of spurring back up, breaking down different materials, and then eventually getting into a finished compost that you can spread. But so a lot of people just, when they're composting at home or in a garden, will just think of one big pile, but really these 3 bin systems are going to allow you to manage these 3 phases very efficiently. But another thing that's going to happen, because when we're obviously throwing food waste into an open atmosphere, we're going to run the risk of attracting unwanted pests like raccoons or skunks, or we're out here in Montana, bears are a big issue. So what we're doing, or in New York City, for instance, as Adrienne showed that last picture with that 3 bin system, rats, mice. So we're creating an enclosed environment that's going to keep these unwanted pests out as well.
Because it has mesh on all sides.
It's got mesh on all sides.
Let's
okay.
talk about other ways to do it.
And there's other ways to compost. It's really is what we call a food waste hierarchy. So first of all, when we're talking about food waste, it's a big issue. 50%, roughly 50% of food produced in this country is disposed of before it even gets to a consumer. And so it's crazy to think that there are folks in this world that go hungry when we are just throwing food away, due to blemishes and things like that. So first of all, we want to reduce the amount of food that we're tossing. So we want to create systems in which we have markets for seconds or ugly produce. We have outlets to put this food into that are going to feed our communities and feed humans instead of throwing it in the landfill. Below that would be feeding animals. So a lot of backyard or home gardeners will have chickens to feed their food scraps to, which are going to feed the chickens. It's going to be an outlet for not throwing it in the landfill. And then you get wonderful eggs and wonderful chicken poop too, to then compost as well.
The chickens do the composting for you, basically.
Yeah. And then actually composting the food waste is actually below feeding it in this food waste hierarchy. But sometimes, on a large scale, composting is kind of, and then there's actually, and then it's diverting, not wasting, feeding to animals. A big thing now is actually energy production, in which you're taking food waste, you're putting them actually into these big methane digesters. So they're actually taking food waste with the energy production aspect of it. They're taking the food waste, they're putting it into an anaerobic environment, encouraging no oxygen to be there, and then encouraging those microbes that are going to release the methane, and then harvesting that methane for energy production. And then composting is under that, which I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but that's neither here nor there.
We'll go to the worm bin. Another way to compost at home without a 3-bin system or chickens is starting a little worm bin. And this can be very simple, and it can take many forms. I've seen people use their worm bins as like ottomans or pieces of furniture in their house.
I don't know about that.
You gotta maybe be a little careful of what you're feeding the worms, but you can get pretty creative with it. You want to talk about vermicomposting?
Yeah, it's
more limited.
It's more limited as to what you could feed them. You obviously are volume-wise too. You're restricted as well. But I mean, yeah, vermicomposting is very popular, especially in regenerative agriculture, because worms, their castings are nutrient dense. Is nutrient dense in product as well too. But yeah, vermicomposting. We had a worm bin in New York. That was actually my introduction into composting, was from living in Boston, Massachusetts, not having access to outdoor space, and so composting my food waste through a vermicompost bin that I bought off Craigslist. But it can be, and so I'm going to say this: it can be, it can go bad pretty quickly in your house. But what basically I want to get across here is active management. Composting, it's like, like I mentioned, you can just put material into a pile and eventually it will break down. But if you're trying to do it in a way that you want to get finished material to add to your garden, you have to actively manage this material. You got to get in there and turn it. You got to watch your moisture content. You got to watch your temperature levels to make sure that you're doing the process correctly as well. And then also thinking about vectors of unwanted pests that I mentioned, but also smells, odors. It is not an odorless process. It can smell really bad if it's not maintained properly, and that's when you have piles what they go anaerobic. So they've collapsed on themselves. There's no oxygen in there, and then those micro populations that are associated with methane production take over, and that's when you get bad smells, and that's typically when you're going to attract more pests, and that's when you're going to get your neighbors upset with you, so on and so forth. So managing your composting process is very important.
There's also, more ways that you can compost your food waste without necessarily taking it on yourself. I found a cool app that seems pretty active in Portland. I think it's called Share Waste. I'm gonna show a screenshot I took of it, but it's where people can post if they have a pile, or you can join if you have food scraps that you want to donate, or if somebody has a community garden or their own compost pile where they're accepting food waste. You can kind of get matched with people, which I think is a really cool app. And I looked around here, and of course there's nobody here, so I put us on there, but maybe it'll grow. But But yeah, using, you know, asking your neighbor if they have a compost pile that you can contribute to. Like most neighbors want more more material to go in so it stays hotter and more active.
Exactly. A big part of, like, you know, I mentioned that our 130 degrees is ideal for hot, 130 degrees plus is ideal for hot composting. It can be hard, it can be difficult for a small backyard composter to reach those temperatures. And a big part of that is thermal mass is that's like, the bigger your pile, the hotter it's gonna get. Rough, you know, it's a pretty broad term or broad statement, but a thermal mass is a big part of, you know, pile size will help your temperatures get up. And so yeah, an active community garden is always accepting food waste. When we lived in New York City, I worked for the New York City Composting Project, where we were collecting food waste like here on a street corner and processing it in bigger windrows. But then also we were very active with the community garden down the street from our apartment, in which we allowed the community to come and contribute to our 3-bin system, because just the amount that the community gardeners diverted wasn't enough to really keep things going. So, you know, you're just feeding those microbes. And then, yeah, so maybe this is a good photo here of the compost distribution. And then, so yeah, and then after this management process, you've got your finished compost. We sift it. You want to sift it to kind of get out any, you know, for us, it's a lot of bones that didn't fully break down, or bigger pieces of carbon, rocks, things like that. Sift it out so you have a nice consistent substrate, if you will, of material to then add into your garden. And so application is what I'm trying to get at, compost application. It's an amendment, it's a soil amendment. You never want to just plant fully into compost, because it's not going to have enough nutrients to sustain a plant through its whole life cycle. When we talk about soil amendments, fertilizers, there's 3 numbers that you'll typically see associated with. It'll typically be, you know, 10, 5, 5. You'll see these numbers. They will be 3 different numbers, and they always change depending on what the application of the fertilizer is. But basically, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And those are the 3 major macronutrients that are most associated with plant health and plant growth. Now, a basic fertilizer is typically going to be like a 10-5-5. Finished compost is typically 1-1-1, to just kind of give you an understanding that, you know, yes, we're talking about capturing nutrients and putting it back in, but it's a longer term, it's a more holistic fertilizer application, if you will. It's something you have to do over time. So it's like adding nutrients in, but really what the big thing is getting that organic matter into the ground and building organic matter back up, because organic matter in soil is very important. It's how our soils hold on to nutrients so they don't leach out. It's good for aeration, which is good for root growth. It's good for water retention, which is good for plant health. And it's just this whole, it does a lot in our soils.
It's a cycle within
It's
itself.
a cycle. So for application, so we're not just like, oh, I built a raised bed, I'm gonna fill it all with compost. No, what you're gonna do is really typically you're gonna fill it majority of the way up with topsoil, and then you're gonna add in compost to that top inch or 2 and work it into the soil. Because again, majority, and we're talking about the microbes component of this all now, majority of the living microbes in our soils exist in the top inch or 2 of our soils. Below that, it really depletes off. So you're applying in that way. working into the top inch or two of your raised bed, or in your in your basic garden bed as well too. You can do that at beginning of year. You can also spot apply as well too. So you've got some compost and you just apply to right around where your transplant might be. That way you're feeding it directly as well too. You can mulch with compost, which is a great application to over the summer. If you've got compost that's kind of got more wood chips in it, that's not a bad thing. That's good. That's going to be carbon that's going to be released over time. That's going to build those soils up, build that organic matter up in your garden. But it's going to do exactly as a mulch will do, which is going to, you know, keep the ground cooler, going to help with moisture retention, going to be a weed suppressant over time as well. So here I am at one of our compost distribution. A big part of what we're trying to do with our business is connect people to their waste, but also through their waste, connect them into local food production, whether that be via backyard gardens or with the local farms that we work with here. And, you know, food production, flower production, you know, just local horticulture and agriculture in general. And so, yeah, so we do these monthly compost distributions where our clients come out, get free compost as part of their subscription, our subscribers. We sell to the general public as well too. Actually, just this morning I was delivering to a yard of compost to a neighbor here in town. So yeah, it's really about connecting people, you know, to this closed loop system that we're trying to achieve here, where we're taking, you know, locally grown food, feeding ourselves, taking the waste byproduct from that, composting it, getting the finished compost back into the gardens and the local agriculture, and then completing that cycle over and over. But also too, outside of that, keeping our local dollars circulating as well, you know, buying local produce, going to local restaurants, composting, supporting that back end, and then keeping those dollars circulating, just like the nutrients and the organic matter as well. So it's really, and for me too, about connecting people to their waste. And so having folks think about how we consume and how we waste, but also, and then how we consume and then the waste byproducts that come from that, but also then connecting to growing food. Because I really feel that growing food, gardening, flowers, what have you, just getting and playing in the backyard and being in the soil is a great way for us as individuals, as humans, to connect to this natural cycle that happens all around us, that allows us to live and sustain and thrive on this planet. It's a really great introductory. If you feel I don't have a green thumb, I don't know about environmentalism, I don't feel connected to the natural world around me necessarily, growing a plant yourself in your yard is a great way to just feel connected to this larger, you know, ecosystem that we are part of.
Agreed.
Okay, that's it. Goodbye.
Okay, that was amazing. Thank you so much. I don't know if you saw me, I was taking a live video of you for Growing Gardens for the, hopefully it'll go on the Instagram. So I was hoping some other people could kind of get a taste of what you guys are talking about. I feel like I made so many notes and learned so much from this talk. But I don't know if there's any questions. I have a couple questions. That was first off just like so in depth, and thank you so much for talking about every type of different composting style to like how it, you know, works in the environment. Does anyone else have a question before I jump into some of mine? Okay, it looks like Michael does. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right, Mr. Bunsen, please.
Yeah, I was wondering, like when you purchase compost, I feel like it's so different every time, and sometimes like we just gotta a bunch that seemed like it was more soil-like, you know, and like do we just plant right into this? And other times it feels more like wet and more like just like closer to manure, you know. And I feel like when you purchase compost, it can be very different and not always sure how to use it, you know, like and I was thinking about, I was just wondering if you know about how, the different kinds of compost that people sell as compost, and if there's different ways you want to think about applying it based on how when it comes to you, what it's like.
Yeah, certainly. That's a great question. So yeah, there is, compost is this very blanketed, basic term, obviously, that kind of we use to talk about the process, to talk about the finished product, etc. But yeah, there is really what it comes down to is feedstocks and what you're using to make this compost. So, yeah, you can obviously make compost from manure. You can make it from food waste. Food waste composting is actually a pretty new form of composting that is starting to gain popularity in this country. I mean, it's always been here, but to have it done on a large scale by companies like ourselves or city municipalities and taking that finished compost, that's most of the compost, I think, really over the years and years and years that you're going to the home gardening store is typically from manure sources or biosolids coming from wastewater treatment plants or other large agricultural feedstocks, green waste, compost, yard waste, horticulture, landscaping waste, things like that. So yeah, that's going to ultimately affect what the end product is. But another thing, like we just make a finished compost, that's it. But a lot of the times companies will make potting soils out of it. So you can actually they're adding other amendments into it to give it a full spectrum nutrient content. But also a lot of people are really into the big thing right now is fungal heavy composting, because we're realizing the important symbiotic relationship between plants and their root development and fungal communities in our soil. Fungal communities in our soil will connect with root systems in plants, and they have this symbiotic relationship where it's essentially allowing for the root system of a plant to really go further than it could ever by having these fungal communities and rhizomes connect with it. But yeah, different applications. Manure composting, a lot of the times what we're seeing a lot of right now, and not only manure, but also yard waste composting, or like horticulture landscape waste composting. A lot of herbicide residuals that are left over from these feedstocks that have been sprayed heavily, and that the herbicide or pesticide will persist through the composting process, and then you'll go and apply it and it'll have a negative effect in your garden. But yeah, it's, whenever you're buying from a producer, it's important to know what their feedstocks are, how they're making that compost. If they're, you can always ask for test results as well too, where they're going to give you all the nutrient breakdown as well. And then that will kind of guide you on how you apply. So yeah, so like, it's like when we're growing food, when we're growing food with compost that we've made, we do want to be a little careful to make sure that hey, it's not a biosolids compost coming from wastewater treatment plant. What you can see there is pharmaceutical residue persists through that could have bad effects on us over time and contaminate our soils. The herbicide that will potentially kill off a lot of the plants. Like last summer, there was a big nursery here in town where we live in Montana, and they were distributing a lot of compost that had particularly an herbicide that persisted through that affected nightshades. So it killed off tons of people's tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, potatoes, and it caused a big stink here in town. So, again, knowing what the feeds, I think the big thing to take away from that is when you're using compost, know what the feedstock is that made it. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's awesome. I have a question. I think the worm composting is like is just a really awesome, as you're saying, like a really active, you need to be really active in managing it. But I think it's a really awesome idea for people who might have limited space or might be just have a smaller backyard. I'm curious, like, how small and effective can your compost bins if you're doing the 3-pile? And then also for worm bins, do you know any type of, should they get a specific type of worm for those? Or can you feed those anything?
So that's a great question. In regards to worm bins, you want red wiggler worms is the species that we use in vermicomposting. They are the most prolific eaters out of all the worms. They can, I forget,
They
it's something,
reproduce a lot.
they reproduce a lot. They can, it's something like they consume like 10 times their body mass a day. And so you want those. And then you do have to be a little careful about what you're feeding them. You're not going to feed them any meats. You're not going to feed them any dairy, any oil. Really, it's just vegetable and fruit waste that you're going to feed them. And then also, again, carbaceous material. A lot of the times that's shredded newspaper. And you do have to, it can be, you have to, you just can't continue. A lot of the times you'll produce more waste than you can feed your worms as well too. So people have multiple worm bins going if they're really active about it. But yeah, you have to be a little careful. You have to manage, you can get those boxes can get too wet, which will create a bad situation for those worms. They can get real stinky. They can get gnat infestations and mite infestations that will affect the worms and the box as well. So again, it's all.
But if you've got a good environment, regulated temperatures in your house, etc., and you are managing it, you're tending to them daily, making sure their environment looks good. We had worms for a long time in New York, and it never stunk. It was great. And it's like, but then we left town and they all died. So it wasn't a success story in the end, but it's.
But that was, again, that was a mismanagement practice.
Yeah, we left them unattended.
So it's all back to this whole thing of active management. It's an active process that we must, if we want to have a successful composting program in our gardens, in our home, etc., we have to actively manage it.
Thank you so much. Michael, do you still have a question, or is your hand? Okay, the hand's still up. No, that is awesome. And thank you so much for going through sort of, oxygen levels, moisture, temperature. Like, those are the 3 things people can kind of think of and check in on. I guess, yeah, I mean, I think you answered a lot of my questions too. And I just really want to thank you all for being here and taking the time out. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us or anything?
Yeah, there's some good resources out there. The Rodell Institute is always a great resource for gardening, but they also have an extensive composting resource online. Cornell University is a great resource for composting of all sorts, backyard, agricultural, industrial. Worms Eat My Food is a great resource, is a great book for intro into very basics of vermicomposting. Excuse me, reaching out to your local agricultural extension office. They will have good resources for you regarding backyard composting as well. A lot of the times too, these agricultural extension offices will have, grants that they'll be able to give. I mean, a big thing that we did in New York, the organization I worked for, is that we had micro grants that allowed people to build 3-bin composting systems. We would come in. I'm sure there must be organizations out there that can help your gardeners set up a successful composting program there. And then again, it's community building as well. Just like growing food is community building, being a hub for organic waste to be diverted in a community like that is it's a great resource, and it's a great community-based hub for building, you know, environmental justice, social justice. It's all interrelated. You know, these are, you know, this is just a way for us to get engaged again with how our communities are handling waste, and it can trickle down.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. I know we're going to be putting this on our YouTube channel and then also sharing it with all of our gardeners. And a lot of them are first year gardeners. So I think a lot of this information is like really, really helpful for kind of understanding the whole process and where we fit into it and kind of getting excited. I feel like I'm getting excited to also have a 3-bin system at some point someday. So yeah.
Actually,
Another thing important to remember is don't forget to comment, like,
and subscribe. Exactly.
You turn those notifications on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Michael, do you have a question?
oh yeah, I was just thinking for the gardeners right now, like I know a lot of people have planted their veggies and have like veggies so their beds are already in place, and some stuff is starting to grow. What would be like maybe the next application of compost you would recommend, like trying to like at one of these months, like side dress it, or continuously every couple weeks or something like that?
Exactly. Yeah. Side dressing is a great application at this point. Like out here in Montana, last Friday we had 3 inches of snow on the ground. So people really kind of hold off to transplant until home gardeners that don't have. June 1st is typically the last frost here. So if you don't have a greenhouse or something like that, a lot of people are holding off. But if you've already transplanted, side dressing is a great way. Another good thing is you can make compost tea, and you can do a foliar application. A lot of plants will actually take in nutrients from their leaves as well too. So foliar application, and also those microbes are going to, you're going to be feeding with nutrients, but also the microbes in the compost also help combat diseases and other pests as well.
Amazing. And when you say side dress, could you explain a little bit about, is that?
Yeah, so that would just be you've got your transplants, you've got your, spring carrots coming up, what have you. And it's just going in and just applying compost on to the top of the soil itself. Not really incorporating it into that top 1 inch or 2, because you don't want to disturb your young seedlings or root growth. But that compost will sit, it will act as a mulch, it will maintain moisture in your soils, but then slowly over time will break down and just naturally work itself into the soil. And, and that would, that is kind of
just sprinkling it around the.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that's definitely a good tip that I think all of our gardeners will be doing in the next couple weeks, because we just did plant distribution day. So everyone has their new starts. They've gotten them in the ground, and yeah. This is really, thank you so much. And I know that we're almost to time, but I really, really appreciate you kind of diving deep and talking about, every aspect of compost. It really is great.
I can talk about it for hours and days.
I could talk with you two about it for hours as well. So